On my 60th birthday, my own son gripped my shoulder so hard it left a mark, slid a stack of legal papers across the table, and told me to sign away the only home I'd ever owned while my grandchildren cheered in the background thinking it was all part of the party. That's where this story starts. But to understand how I ended up staring down at that pen, you need to know everything that came before it. Because what happened to me didn't happen in one afternoon. It happened over months of small, quiet moments I chose to ignore because believing my family loved me was easier than facing the truth. My name is Daniel Carter. I spent 38 years as an electrician outside Columbus, Ohio. Long days, cold winters, hot attics in July, until my knees reminded me every morning exactly how I'd earned every dollar. I retired 3 months before turning 60, not because I wanted to, but because my body finally voted against me. My co-workers threw me a small party, coffee, a gold watch, a signed photo. Nothing fancy, but it meant something. When I got home, I expected my family waiting. Instead, the house was empty. They'd forgotten. My son Brian texted 2 hours later. "Sorry, Dad, crazy day. I told him not to worry." Parents get used to disappointment long before their children realize they're causing it. Brian hadn't always been that way. As a boy, he followed me everywhere, carrying my toolbox that was nearly bigger than he was. I wish life had frozen right there. His mother, Linda, died of breast cancer when Brian was 19. I buried my wife, then buried my own grief, because my son still needed a father. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and sold Linda's wedding ring to help cover Brian's tuition after his scholarships fell short. I never told him. I let him believe it came from savings. After graduation, I helped him buy his first truck. When he wanted to start a landscaping business, I emptied a large chunk of my retirement account for the down payment. He cried and promised he'd repay every penny. I just hugged him and told him to build a good life. Years later, he married Ashley, beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who could charm a stranger in 5 minutes. At first, I thought she liked me too. She'd invite me for Sunday dinners, ask about Linda. But slowly, small comments started slipping in. "This neighborhood's getting old. You should update the kitchen. People your age don't need such a big house. Nothing cruel on its own. Just tiny seeds." Soon Brian was repeating them without realizing it. I always just smiled. Truth was, I never planned to leave. Linda's favorite maple tree stood in the backyard, planted the day Brian was born. One dream came true. The other didn't. After I retired, Brian and Ashley started visiting more, bringing the grandkids, Emma, 11, and Luke, 8. For a while I convinced myself things were getting better. Then one afternoon I overheard Ashley on the phone in my own kitchen. If he would just let go of the house. She stopped the second she saw me, smiled, and asked if I wanted more coffee. I pretended not to notice, because sometimes pretending is easier than accepting the truth. A week later, Brian invited me to dinner. "Let's celebrate your 60th at your house," he said. Ashley nodded enthusiastically. Emma bounced in her seat. "It's going to be the best birthday ever, Grandpa." For the first time in months, I felt wanted. I had no idea they were planning something else entirely. Over the next few weeks, Brian started calling almost every other day, offering to mow the lawn. Ashley showed up one Saturday with homemade lasagna, something she'd never done once in 15 years of marriage. I wanted to believe it. God help me. I really wanted to. One afternoon in the garage, Brian found his old Little League glove. "I remember this," he said, smiling. "I was scared someone would steal it." You were scared of everything back then, I said. He looked at me. Not when you were around. For a second I saw my little boy again. That memory stayed with me all week, and it made me ignore the strange questions that followed. Dad, where do you keep your important paperwork, insurance, your will? I laughed it off. Disappointment flashed across his face when I brushed it aside. Most people would have missed it. I wish I had. About a week later, my neighbor Frank Donovan stopped me at the mailbox. I've seen Brian over here a lot, he said. Him and Ashley measuring things. The lot, the garage, the fence. I told him they were probably planning my party. Frank asked, "Do you trust them?" The question caught me off guard. "They're my family," I said. "That's not what I asked." Before walking away, he said, "If you ever need anything, call me." At the time, I thought he was just being a good neighbor. Now I know he was trying to warn me. A few days later, a certified letter arrived from a law office downtown. I tossed it on the passenger seat and forgot about it. It sat unopened on my counter for nearly 2 weeks, one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Meanwhile, Brian's landscaping company looked like it was thriving. A newer truck, Ashley's new SUV, vacation photos. What I didn't know was that almost none of it was actually paid for. His company had expanded too fast, taken out loans, then 2 major clients went bankrupt. Bills piled up. The only thing valuable enough to secure one more loan was my fully paid-off house, worth nearly $500,000. I knew none of it. The Friday before my birthday, I visited Linda's grave with fresh daisies. "I think things are finally getting better," I told her. If she'd still been alive, none of what happened next would have happened. She would have seen through every fake smile instantly. The night before, Ashley called to say they'd arrive early and not to cook. I noticed the unopened attorney's letter still sitting on the counter and told myself it could wait until Monday. I went to bed believing tomorrow would be one of my happiest birthdays. Instead, it became the day I lost my home. Morning arrived exactly as promised. Balloons, a banner reading "Happy 60th Dad," my grandchildren laughing in the yard. Then Brian sat me down at the same oak table Linda and I had saved 6 months to buy, and slid a stack of legal papers in front of me. His fingers dug into my shoulder. "Sign it," he said. "It doesn't have to be ugly." Ashley slid a pen toward me. My grandchildren smiled, thinking this was part of the celebration, having no idea their grandfather was being pushed out of the only home he'd ever owned. I reached for the pen without arguing. Brian looked surprised. "You're actually signing." I signed every page slowly, then pushed the papers back across the table. No one spoke. I walked to the front door, where a packed suitcase already waited. Ashley hadn't forgotten a thing, not even my blood pressure medicine. I picked it up, turned, and took one last look at the house Linda and I built nearly 30 years earlier. Then I looked my son in the eyes. "You have no idea what you just did." His smile didn't move. "Goodbye, Dad." I nodded once and walked out. I made it to the end of the street before I had to pull over. I sat there and let myself cry, not because I'd lost the house, but because my son had destroyed everything his mother and I built and felt nothing. After 5 minutes, I wiped my face and drove on. Instead of a motel, I checked into a quiet extended stay hotel near New Albany. I unpacked exactly 3 things: my medicine, a photo of Linda, and an old leather notebook full of phone numbers. The next morning, before sunrise, I made the first call. Richard Wallace, my attorney and fishing partner of 20 years, told me to come in at 10. When I walked into his office carrying one suitcase, he simply asked, "What happened?" So I told him everything. When I finished, he said, "In 34 years of practicing law, this is one of the cruelest things I have ever heard." Then he asked if I'd actually signed. Yes. Voluntarily? I said nothing. He nodded, understanding completely, then pulled out several folders and smiled, a very small smile. He reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. 12 years earlier, Linda had insisted we set up a revocable living trust, protecting me even from family, she'd said, especially from family. I'd laughed it off back then. She'd only squeezed my hand and said, "I hope you're right." Richard slid a thick folder across the desk, documents Brian had never seen. Investment accounts, dividend stocks, municipal bonds, a rental duplex Linda had inherited from her aunt. I'd forgotten about most of it because professional managers handled it automatically. The house had never been the whole picture. It had only ever been the piece I was emotionally attached to. That afternoon, my financial advisor, Karen Mitchell, confirmed it. Pension, social security, investment distributions, rental income, more than enough for one person to live comfortably. I hadn't lost my future. I'd only lost an address. 2 days later, I rented a small apartment overlooking Hoover Reservoir. I wasn't hiding. I was healing. Richard had been clear. Don't make emotional decisions. Let the law do its job. Meanwhile, Brian believed life had finally gone his way. My neighbor Frank kept me updated, not because I asked, but because news travels fast on a quiet street. They tore out the kitchen within days, new floors, new cabinets, a refrigerator worth more than my first car. Ashley posted photos online, captioned, "Fresh start." I looked once, then closed my phone. 3 weeks later, the first crack appeared. Brian called asking if I had copies of the original property survey. The bank wanted additional paperwork, he said. "What bank?" I asked. "Our lender." "I thought you owned the house now." "We do." "So why do you need a lender?" A long pause. "It's just refinancing." I told him it wasn't, and he hung up. Richard wasn't surprised. Owning the house didn't solve Brian's financial problems because banks don't approve massive loans on property alone. His business had deeper problems than a paid-off house could fix. A week later, Frank called again. The sheriff had been by, serving papers. Equipment suppliers had filed claims. A subcontractor said he'd never been paid. Then came the tax issues, payroll penalties, interest. I had no idea, I told Richard. "That's because they worked very hard to make sure you didn't," he said. That Friday I drove past my old neighborhood just to say goodbye. Construction trucks filled the driveway. And on the porch, Brian and Ashley were screaming at each other. "You said this would fix everything," she shouted. "It was supposed to," he yelled back. They changed their minds. "They didn't change anything. You lied." The grandkids stood watching from just inside the door, learning exactly what children always learn from moments like that. I drove away before anyone saw me. That evening, Emma called, not Brian, not Ashley. "Grandpa, Mum says we can't visit anymore." "I know, sweetheart, I miss you too." She asked quietly if I was mad at them. "No," I promised. Then she whispered, "I thought it was your idea." Children believe what adults tell them until life teaches them otherwise. Before hanging up, she asked if birthdays were supposed to make people cry. "No," I told her. "They're supposed to remind us who's grateful we're still here." The following Monday, Richard laid out records that belonged entirely to Brian: financial statements, property filings. Business liens. He never told you because he couldn't, Richard said. Once you knew the truth, you never would have signed anything voluntarily. He was right. I would have found another way to help. Richard slid over one final document, a letter addressed to Brian. Only facts, nothing emotional. When he reads it, Richard said, he'll finally understand what happened the moment you smiled and walked out that door. 3 days after it was mailed, Brian started calling. I didn't answer. The texts changed too. Dad, we need to talk. Not how are you? I finished breakfast without reacting, living my own life for the first time in weeks. Richard later told me Brian had shown up demanding answers, only to learn that owning my old house gave him ownership of nothing else. The trust, the investments, the rental property, all still protected. None of it ever promised to him. He never asked, Richard said. He assumed. That word stayed with me all day. Brian had assumed the house was everything. He'd never once asked. He'd simply decided. Frank stopped by with a fishing pole one evening. Brian came by my place, he finally said, asking about you. I told him if he wanted to find his father, he should have thought about that before throwing him away. Frank added quietly, you only get so many chances to do right by your parents. The following weekend, Emma showed up at my door alone, Frank having driven her. She threw her arms around me. I'm sorry, Grandpa, I didn't know. She handed me a drawing of our old backyard, the maple tree, the tire swing. Across the top she'd written, I miss home. Not the house, home. She asked if her dad said sorry, would I come back? Sometimes, I told her, you have to become someone different before sorry means anything. She nodded slowly. I think Dad's trying. So do I said. The next morning, Brian showed up at my door looking 10 years older, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. I let him in. He pulled out old records he'd found in my filing cabinet, Linda's medical bills, the receipt for her wedding ring. Tears rolled down his face. You sold it so I could finish college. I would have quit, he said. I told him parents aren't supposed to make their children carry debts they never asked for. Then he said something I'll never forget. I don't recognize the man I've become. Neither did I. He pulled out an old photo album Linda had made years before she died. On the final page, in her handwriting, she'd written, Take care of each other after I'm gone. Love is the only inheritance worth fighting for. Before leaving, I told him what Linda used to tell me. Character isn't measured by the worst thing you've done. It's measured by what you choose to become afterward. He walked out without another word. Brian didn't come back the next day or the day after. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to fix everything overnight. He gave me time. Sometimes time isn't distance. Sometimes it's respect. A week later, Emma called again. Dad wants to know if you'll meet us at the cemetery Saturday. Brian was already standing at Linda's grave when I arrived, Ashley a few steps behind, Emma and Luke holding white lilies. I've been here every Saturday since I left your apartment, Brian said. She would have dragged you here herself, I told him. Emma laid the flowers down. Luke quietly pulled weeds from around the stone. Nobody asked them to. Ashley stepped forward. I owe you an apology. No excuses. I looked at your house like a prize, she said. I forgot it wasn't just a house. It was your life. It was Linda. It was your family. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just told the truth, and that mattered. Brian pulled an envelope from his jacket, the deed to my old house signed back to me. I told him he didn't have to. I know, he said, but maybe one day I'll deserve being your son again. I handed the deed back. I already said goodbye to that house. I told him. My life came with me when I walked out the front door. I don't need the house anymore. I need peace. A month later, I sold it to a young couple with a 3-year-old daughter who ran laughing beneath Linda's maple tree. "We'll take good care of it," her mother said. Somehow I believed her. With the proceeds, I bought a small cottage near Hoover Reservoir, 1 bedroom, a workshop, a porch over the water. Richard helped me set up an education trust for Emma and Luke, available for college or trade school, but only if they completed financial literacy courses and community service every year until 25. Linda would have approved, Richard said. I know she would. The months passed. Brian never asked for money again. Instead, he showed up every Saturday, fishing, fixing furniture in my workshop, drinking coffee without needing to fill the silence. Trust returned slowly, not because he wanted forgiveness, but because he stopped expecting it. Ashley started volunteering at a food pantry, quietly, without posting a single photo. Emma wrote me letters. Luke learned woodworking beside me. Almost a year after that birthday, Brian and I sat on my porch, watching the sun go down over the water. "I still think about that day," he admitted. "So do I. When you said I had no idea what I'd done, I thought you meant the money." "You weren't talking about the house," he said. "No," I told him. "I was talking about us. Rebuilding trust takes far longer than destroying it." He thanked me quietly for the chance. "Thank your mother," I told him. "She taught us both how. If you've stayed with me until the end, remember this. A house can be replaced. Money can be earned again. Even broken relationships can sometimes be rebuilt. But respect is a choice you make every single day. If your parents are still here, call them. If you've made a mistake, don't wait years to admit it. And if someone has truly changed, don't be afraid to leave the door open just a little. If this story moved you, hit like, drop a comment about the part that stuck with you most, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales so you never miss the next one. Your support keeps these stories coming, so share this with someone who needs to hear it, and we'll see you in the next story.